You're listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvine, and this is the podcast where you'll get expert advice about the heavy duty parts you buy, and this will keep you informed about what's happening in the industry. This episode is sponsored by Zerk.work. If you are a mobile heavy duty mechanic, please check out Zerk.work. When should you rebuild a fan clutch, and what parts should you use? Well, today you're going to get the answers to these questions and much more. And to help us with that, I'd like to introduce Brian Swanson, sales manager at Kitmasters. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
What was the driving force behind launching Kitmasters?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a long answer, but I'll try to give you the shortest version of it. Kitmasters was started in the spring of 1996 by my father and one of my brothers. And prior to starting Kitmasters, we were involved in the heavy-duty trucking industry for 20 years previous to that. My father was, and then me, and then my a couple of my brothers. And eventually, we saw, and we had specific experience in the fan clutch industry. And we saw at that time the fan clutch industry with the existing players in there kind of moving in a direction that, well, by no means was unethical or wrong or anything like that. It was just there was a lot of customers that weren't satisfied with the direction that was moving, and both from a supply chain standpoint and from a quality of the product standpoint. So my father and one of my brothers, Darren, decided to start a company to compete against that, or to offer what they thought the industry was missing. That was really the driving force. In a short answer, the driving force was my dad used to say the key to business is to find a hole and fill it. And we felt like there was a void in the industry, and they thought that they could fill it. And so they started the company here in Minnesota, and it started it was just the two of them. They started in the garage in the bedroom, and my old bedroom was our manufacturing facility, and the garage was our shipping and receiving department. And we converted the downstairs living room into offices, and that was the beginning of it all. And we started with one customer and a couple of part numbers and a couple of customers, and the product that we were offering and the way that we were offering it was accepted by the industry so much that we grew in size, and we grew in customers, and we eventually added another product part number and another part number and another customer and another customer. And we moved out of that little garage and bedroom into a little industrial facility where we grew more and added more products. And then we moved from there into the plant that we have now. And then we doubled the size of that plant, and then we doubled it again, and then we doubled it again. And here we are now 23 years later. That's kind of the beginning of Kitmasters, and throughout its history, it's grown because customers have accepted the platform that we're trying to offer. Our identity is being accepted, I guess.
It's interesting because I started in the business in 1998, and I worked for a company called Contec Products, and we manufactured fan clutch kits as well. And I remember I would say it was probably about 99 is the first time I heard about Kitmasters. And I think maybe in those early years, it's quite possible that Kitmasters and Contec Products were perhaps neck and neck in the development of fan clutch kits. And then our owner decided to go in a different direction, and really the rest is history. And I think that Kitmasters was positioned better in the industry to service that market. And I think you guys have done a phenomenal job. I look back at those early years, and it's just, to me, it's kind of interesting to 20 some years later come full circle and be able to interview you about this. When it comes to your company, you're not just a replacement parts company. You are actually more of an engineering company, aren't you? Because don't you even hold some patents now on certain technology?
We do. We hold a number of patents, and that was well said, Jamie, that we don't consider ourselves just like the OE, except cheaper. You know, I always say I consider there to be a stereotype that exists in our industry, and it's a stereotype that's, I think, somewhat justified in reality. But the stereotype is that quality is the eminent domain of the genuines, that you have to be a genuine. I don't want to throw out other names of any other companies, but I think you and your listeners will know what I mean, that you have to be you see it advertised all the time. Make sure you buy genuine, and it's genuine this and genuine that. And there are aftermarket companies that are in business to sell an alternative to these genuines. And quite frequently, those aftermarket companies will market themselves as, hey, we're just as good as genuine, or we're just like this OE company. And to me, that's a huge red flag when you see that marketed, that anytime that if that's the best that you can claim to be is just like somebody else, for me, that would throw up a red flag. That is not what Kitmasters is all about. Our identity to the market is solutions. So everything that we do is driven around creating a solution. We always say, if you don't have a problem, then you don't need Kitmasters. If you buy or whatever existing technology came on the truck, if you've never had a problem with it, and you've never had a problem purchasing it, and you understand everything about it, then you should go back and buy exactly what you took off. And we exist for the people that have problems. The problems that people have, when we make that sentence, people almost always think right away of the technical problems that you could have, and that certainly is what we focus on the most. But the problems that people have might be supply chain problems, they might be price problems, they might be education problems, they might be relationship problems, they might be warranty issues or core issues or policy issues, but most frequently they are technical issues. And from all of those standpoints, whichever it is, we're trying to solve those problems. Specific to technical issues that people have, our approach there is, as an aftermarket rebuilder of fan clutches, we tear down, thousands and thousands of fan clutches every year. And in the teardown process, if you can imagine that, most of your technicians will know what that means. It's kind of a nasty, dirty job, but for us, we look at it as an opportunity to perform failure analysis. So every time we tear down a fan clutch, that's a fan clutch that at some point broke and was either returned to us by a customer or we found it in a scrapyard, but it's a fan clutch that broke. And we get to open it up, do some Minnesota CSI on it, and find out what caused that fan clutch to fail. And those things don't change from day to day, but they do change over time. And if you look at 10,000 fan clutches and you see that 7,000 of them failed for one reason and 2,000 failed for another reason and 500 for another, and so on and so forth, that gives you a roadmap for the innovation to put into the product, the solutions to engineer in to offer to the market. And that is what Kitmaster is all about that's longer than a sentence, but in a paragraph I can say that's what Kitmaster is about, is identifying the common causes of failure in fan clutches and engineering solutions. And those solutions come in one of two ways. Either it's an engineering solution where we say this failure is being caused because the fan clutch works in a particular way from an engineering standpoint, and other times it's just a component choice where we say this particular component is failing because they choose this supplier or this technology or whatever, and we choose this other technology, a higher quality O-ring or a higher quality bearing or so forth. So sometimes it's a component choice and sometimes it's an engineering change. But focusing on the common causes of failure one by one, starting at the top and working your way down, that's the value of Kitmasters.
Are there any misconceptions about rebuilding a fan clutch?
People often say one of the most frequent things that we hear is that I don't want to rebuild a fan clutch, I just want a complete unit. And while that is certainly a valid position, and there are people who just don't have the time, there's a stack of trucks out in the lot, and they want to turn and burn as fast as they can. And for them, a remanufactured fan clutch is an option, and it's a good option. And we have an entire catalog and website full of complete remanufactured fan clutches. But often when I hear that sentence, I will tell them, hey, I understand what you're saying, and I'm not trying to change your mind about things. If you want a complete unit, then we have them to offer, but let me just walk you through the process of rebuilding. The misconception is, I think when people look at rebuilding a fan clutch, they have in their mind's eye a transmission or something that they're going to put out on the floor on a white sheet in 500 different pieces, and then they're going to put it all together in 500 different pieces, and that's not necessarily the case, and it's especially not the case when you use kit masters. When we've designed our rebuild kit for the most common rebuild that we do is for a Horton style fan clutch. And when you rebuild that fan clutch using our kit, we took almost all of those internal components and turned it into a final assembly. So when you rebuild it with a kit master's kit, really all you're doing is putting the 2 pulley bearings in the pulley, putting a little air cartridge in the shaft, and then we essentially rebuilt the fan clutch for you in the kit. That's the best way I can describe it. You're not rebuilding a fan clutch. You're taking a rebuilt fan clutch and putting it on your existing pulley. All you got to do is put a couple bearings in. And then I'll ask the technician, now, I know you thought this was complicated, but can you put a couple of bearings in the pulley? He's like, well, I can do that. Well, then that's all you have to do. That's as simple as this thing is. And once somebody does it, this is the last thing I'll say on the matter, is once somebody does it, once you rebuild a kit, a fan clutch with a kit master's kit, you'll understand it, and you won't go back. You'll be a believer, but you got to try it once.
You're listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvine, and we've been speaking with Brian Swanson, sales manager at Kitmasters. Brian, how does using one of your kits help a customer lower their cost per mile?
The 2 things that kind of factor into that is your upfront acquisition cost and then your cost over time. How long is this going to last? We have a test, several of them actually, where we'll put a fan clutch on. We'll test it for a certain number of cycles, or we'll test till failure. Using a common fan blade, we'll test the OE fan clutches, and then we'll test our fan clutches. In both cases, we test, then verify again. Then we've got our baseline. Then we'll test ours, verify, and then we'll have our baseline. We're getting right around triple the life out of our fan clutches, baseline versus baseline. And I'm purposely not giving you the number of test cycles, because the test cycles that we have, it's in a facility. It's not going over dirty, rocky roads. It's temperature controlled. So it's not, the cycles don't necessarily equate to miles or years. But we know that it's baseline for baseline, and we know that when you put on a kit master's kit, you're going to get roughly triple the life out of it. So if you can take a fan clutch, and if you're replacing a fan clutch every 3 years or every 4 years, if you're a second owner, and you inherited a truck with the original fan clutch, and then this next one goes bad, whenever that is, you're going to get, more than likely, you're going to get to the end of your usage on that truck without having to replace that fan clutch again. Does that answer your question?
Oh, 100%. And I think it's important that people understand what you're saying here is that you're creating a test environment where you're testing the original equipment parts, and then you create a baseline, and then you're testing your parts, and you're comparing those 2 baselines, and you're seeing 3 times better results with your parts than the baseline of the original equipment. And although that will translate differently on the actual highway in the real world environment, the translation will be consistent because it's baseline for baseline. I think that's what you were trying to say, right?
Yep, that's 100%.
If I can understand it, then you've done a very good job explaining it, because I'm the lowest common denominator here.
No, I don't think so, but
Kitmasters is more than just a fan clutch kit company. I've seen some of the new products that you've been bringing out over the last few years. It's very exciting as a salesperson, myself included, to be able to offer these new solutions to your customers. Could you focus in on a couple of the new products you're bringing out?
Sure. I'll talk about 2 of them real quickly. One we launched 2 or 3 years ago, and then or maybe even 4 or 5 years ago now, and one we just launched last year. The first one is a medium-duty fan clutch line. When we typically, I think most of your listeners, or when we talk about fan clutches, what they have in their mind's eye is a heavy-duty, pneumatically engaged fan clutch, and that certainly is the most popular fan clutch technology in the heavy-duty trucking industry. But in the medium duty industry, we use mostly viscous drives. And when we think about a viscous drive, and again, when Kitmasters attacks any problem, we apply that same logic that we talked about earlier, trying to discover the common causes of failure and engineer solutions. When we talk about viscous drives, especially air sensing viscous drive, it's a very old technology. I call it a dumb technology, meaning it's not that it was a stupid invention, but that it doesn't sense. It's not hooked up to a thermal switch. It's not reading actual engine temperature. It's just sensing the ambient air temperature. And that technology over the past 50 years has been pretty reliable. There isn't a lot of common cause of failure. When we look at the product, there's not a lot of engineering that we need to do to make that thing better. But the problem has been availability, because it's a product line that's been out there for so many years. There's thousands of part numbers, and it's because it's not a super predominant technology. Most distributors and dealers only have a couple of part numbers in stock. And even when you go to their PDCs, if they have one or two in stock, their PDCs might have 7 or 10 in stock. But if you're outside that range, you're waiting on manufacturer lead time, and that can often be 4 to 6 weeks or longer. And so our solution there was, as an aftermarket company, again, to provide a solution to a problem, we looked at all the different technology, all the different part numbers were out there, and found out that there really aren't. If there's thousands of part numbers, that doesn't mean there are thousands of technologies. There is only a few, what we call the head portion, or the drive, the actual fan clutch portion. There's only like a dozen or so of those. They can range in the temperature that they come on. They can range in the fluid that's in there. They can range in the size of internally. There's what's called a shearing plate. That's what ultimately drives the fan blade. And there was, out of all these combinations, there's only a couple dozen options. And then you take all those couple of dozen options and you connect them to, 40 or 50 or 60 brackets, and you end up with a couple thousand part numbers. Well, we looked at all the heads and said, there was a couple of them that would turn on, or that are set to turn on at 180 degrees, and another one that was set at 182. And we said, for the aftermarket, that's kind of dumb. We can just combine a few of these and reduce the amount of part numbers. And then what we did is we separated the heads from the brackets and made it into a modular system. So now here at Kitmasters, whatever you have of those 2,000 part numbers, when you call us for a viscous drive, we can take the head, we can take the bracket, we can put them together in a matter of minutes and ship it out that same day. So that's the solution. The problem was availability, and the solution was making it modular, so that now we can same day ship any air sensing viscous drive. And we created a solution so the distributor can have that modular system too. So if the distributor chooses to, they can put in a certain number of the heads at a certain number of the brackets, and they can combine it right for the customer on the spot.
We've got one of those at our store, and we've got the different options, and it's awesome to be able to have a customer walk in and our guys on the counter can just go over to this stand and grab a couple parts, put it together, and the customer's out the door in just a few minutes. So I've seen firsthand the benefit of having that at the store level and at the retail level, so that customers can take advantage. They don't even have to wait to have it shipped out then. And it's a fantastic product, and it's easy to use.
Well, and the other thing to say, but thank you for that. And the other thing to say about that is the head itself comes through a partnership that we have with BorgWarner, which is really the primary manufacturer of this style of fan clutch. And so when you do that in your facility, you take that head and put it together with that bracket, you're really giving the customer the same fan clutch from the same supplier had he waited the 4 or 5 weeks to get it. So it's not, the customer can have the confidence that they're not even switching to some other thing with some other warranty or some other product or some other technology. It's the same.
What other products do you have that you wanted to talk about?
The other one I want to talk about is our new product, and it's kind of exciting for us. It is our first venture outside the fan clutch world. And last year we introduced a line of belt tensioners. And the reason, again, with our manufacturing philosophy of discovering common causes of failure and our supply chain philosophy of applying solutions to all these different supply chain problems that people have. I think we've got a good distribution base, a good manufacturing philosophy. We were kind of trying to figure out what else we could add to this, add down to this channel. And we looked at a variety of technologies, and there was a couple of, it had to pass a couple of tests. Number one, it had to be a problem. Whatever product it was, it had to be a product that had a problem that was in need of solving. And the second thing was we had to know how to solve it. So there's a couple of things we ran across and said, boy, somebody should really invent something, but we couldn't figure it out. When it came to belt tensioners, though, we really found that we really thought there was an existing problem that could be solved, and we think we've got it solved. The problem that exists in belt tensioners is people think of belt tensioners as a wear item, and correctly so. Like a brake shoe, every time you apply the brake, you wear off a little bit of your brake shoe until there's nothing left, and then you put on a new brake. That's a wear item. Same with belts. Same with a great number of other things. And we kind of looked at why is the tensioner fit in that category? Why is that considered a wear item? Well, really, the two things that can fail in a tensioner, for the most part, the only two things that can fail in a tensioner is the spring inside the tensioner body and the bearing that sits inside the pulley. When a spring has a life cycle, and every time, just like bending a paper clip on your desk, every time you bend it back and forth, you have so many bends before that paper clip breaks. And it's kind of a cool little physics thing, but people often think, well, that's just because I'm doing it real fast. But if you take a paper clip and bend it and put it in your desk drawer and leave it there for a day and pick it up and bend it again the next day, you've got the same bends, whether you do it slowly or whether you do it quickly. And the same thing happens with a spring inside of a tensioner, that every time you contract that spring, that you flex that spring, that's a life cycle. And that really has only so many cycles before it finally breaks. And so we looked at that technology and we thought, is there another way to do this? And what we ultimately did was we applied a technology that exists all over the truck in another way, and we put it in this tensioner. And that is that this is kind of the impact statement. I know I've been leading up to it, but what we did is, in order to get rid of the spring failure, we got rid of the spring and we replaced the spring with a polymer. So now there's a polymer inside of that tensioner body, and it's a polymer that's flexing back and forth, taking up the load of the belt rather than a spring taking up the load of the belt. And you can think of that like, instead of bending a paper clip on your desk, you're bending a rubber band on your desk. And while one's going to break, you can bend a rubber band on your desk infinitely. You can take this polymer tensioner, and it can take the force of that belt with its different components engaging and gets disengaging, and the different movements the tensioner has to make. It can do that almost infinitely without having a wear. I'll just put it this way, that each cycle up and down is not a wear cycle anymore. Then the other thing we did is we doubled the load capacity in the bearing. We put special anti-vibration grease in the bearing. So those two failure points, we can't say we eliminated bearing failure. We can say we pretty much we didn't. We eliminated spring failure. You can't have a spring failure if you don't have a spring. So we eliminated the spring failure, and we made the bearing last considerably longer. There's about 83 tensioners that exist in the heavy-duty world. All 83 tensioners are available in the Polyforce line. We have not migrated down. There's medium-duty and automotive and agricultural belt tensioners, so forth, that'll probably be the next thing for us. But in the heavy-duty market, the 83 tensioners that are out there are available with this new polymer elastomer insert inside the tensioner body.
And you've also got a modular, like a kit that you can buy, don't you? Where you've got different options where you can kind of cover the 80-20 rule.
Man, you know your stuff, Jamie. You're leading me down a good path. But yes, same thing there. That like the viscous drives that we talked about, one of the main problems in tensioners is availability. It's not as significant as in the viscous world, where there's a couple thousand part numbers, and in that world there really isn't an 80-20 rule. In tensioners, there's an 83, and there kind of is an 80-20 rule. If you're a distributor and you stock the top 10 or 15 units, you're probably going to have pretty good coverage for your customers. And a lot of distributors and dealers do stock, those 7 to 10 tensioners or something, so they've got availability. But here again, if you're outside of those 10 tensioners, if you happen to have the 17th most popular tensioner, you're waiting on manufacturer lead time before you can get that tensioner. So here again, we looked at the tensioner and the components, and we said, out of the 83 tensioners, is there really 83 different technologies? And of course there isn't. The tensioner bodies are pretty much the same. There's a little bit of difference between one and another. Then there's an arm, which basically connects the tensioner and the pulley, and there's various lengths of those arms. And then there's the pulley itself, and there's smooth pulleys and rib pulleys. But there's about 13 different tensioner bodies. There's 3 different arms, and there's 5 pulleys. And so we have a system where a distributor can stock those modular components and build, just like your store is building the Spectrum. You can have those modular units and then build the tensioner for the customer. And what's even cooler than that, Jamie, is we have a toolbox that we sell to distributors that distributors then turn around and sell to either repair shops or mobile repair fleets. So if you're a mobile repair in a small town in central United States or central Canada, and you're 200 miles away from your nearest distributor or dealer, even if you're 20 miles away from your nearest distributor or dealer, or even if you're right next door to your nearest distributor or dealer, but you're open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and you get a road call that somebody lost their belt and tensioner, we have a toolbox that's the size of if you can use your imagination, it's the size of a normal, medium-sized toolbox you'd get at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. It's a foot and 18 inches by 9 inches or so. And inside of there, that contains all the different tensioner bodies, all the different arms, and all the different pulleys all fit in a regular-sized toolbox. So a distributor can have this. They can take it out and sell it to a repair shop. That repair shop then can basically build any tensioner that they want at any time of the day they want for any customer they want on the side of the road and keep that customer moving. That has been a pretty successful product. That's catching a lot of buzz.
Yeah, I really like that product. I think it's perfect for the mobile guys, especially like you said, in the smaller communities where they're doing service calls that are maybe far away from the town, or they're out in a logger or an oil-filled truck or something like that. Man, to be able to go out there with confidence to say, yeah, it's a belt tensioner problem, but I don't even need to worry about what part number it is because I've got it in this kit. You guys did a great job on that product. What does the future hold for Kitmasters?
We continue to develop just like Polyforce. We're continuing to find, we're continuing to look for what is that next product that the industry has that's in need of a Kitmasters type solution. We have a few things queued up. Nothing I can discuss with you on the podcast, but I think when you look at our company, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, you're going to see maybe some other Polyforce type products that exist in there. We are continuing to innovate the fan clutch. When we talked about these test stands that we have in that manufacturing philosophy of discovering the common causes of failure, we turn that back on ourselves too. So we look at our own common causes of failure, and we're always continuing to improve our fan clutch. We recently announced to the industry that we were extending our warranty from a 2-year warranty to a 3-year warranty. 3-year, 300,000-mile warranty, which is 2 or 3 times better than anybody else. But it's because of those continuing, ongoing improvements that we make to our fan clutch all the time. So I think when you see 4 to 5 years from now, you're gonna see the products that those trusted and true products are going to be more solid than they are now. And we might take some of these technologies and apply them to some other areas in the even within the fan clutch world. So I'm leaving that just a little bit vague, but what you'll see from us in the future is that taking that manufacturing philosophy and not only applying it across a broader spectrum within our current field of products, but taking that and applying it to even a broader field of products.
Well, that's very exciting. We're looking forward to hearing about some of these new things that you're developing when they become available. You've been listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvine, and we've been speaking with Brian Swanson, sales manager at Kitmasters. To learn more about Kitmasters, go to kit-masters.com. Link is in the show notes. Brian, thank you for being on the podcast.
Jamie, thanks very much.
Have you subscribed to the podcast yet? Go to heavydutypartsreport.com to listen to and subscribe to the podcast. And why not share it with someone in the industry so that they can learn as well about all of these great new things that we've been talking about here. Remember to focus on cost per mile over purchase price, and let's keep those trucks and trailers rolling.